It began on a night so quiet it felt as if even the stars were holding their breath. Somewhere deep in the citadel, in a hallway that no one ever seemed to notice, a Morty had begun to vanish, not with fear or struggle, but with a kind of gentle curiosity, as if the walls themselves had whispered his name, and he had simply answered. And you, dear listener, know that we truly love and care for you. You are here, and that matters. And before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Even in that quiet moment, the air seemed almost alive. Dust motes drifted lazily in the faint glow of ceiling lights, catching on the edges of forgotten posters and the soft curves of narrow doorways. The hallway stretched beyond sight, folding into itself in ways that made no sense if you tried to measure it. And yet, to the Morty who wandered there, it felt like home. Not the kind of home that smells of cooking or echoes with laughter, but the kind of home where each step is remembered by the walls, and every silence is a companion. He had been curious, always curious, even as a small Morty who wandered from classroom to classroom, often unnoticed. The other Mortys rushed past him, busy with their own worries, their own games, their own little urgencies. But he moved slowly, with a lightness in his chest, noticing things that might have seemed trivial. A crack in the paint, a feather caught in the corner of a window, the faint hum of pipes beneath the floor. He carried a quiet understanding of the world, one that did not need loud words to make sense. As he stepped closer to the far end of the hallway, where the walls seemed to lean in a little more than usual, he could feel the subtle pulse of something alive. It was not a fear that made him pause, nor was it a thrill, but something in between, a soft invitation. He reached out, not with his hand, but with the attention in his heart. The wall did not resist. It did not move, not really, but it welcomed him as though it had been waiting. And that was how he began to disappear, slowly, gently, like sunlight slipping beneath the horizon, leaving only a warm glow behind. When he was a little boy, he had discovered that the world often had spaces that were overlooked, tiny corners where things could happen quietly without anyone noticing. He liked to sit in those spaces, sometimes sketching the patterns of the clouds outside, sometimes humming little tunes that his own lips remembered before anyone else could. He didn't always understand the words around him, the hurried conversations or the complicated explanations, but he understood the heart. And in understanding hearts, he had discovered a kind of power, not the flashy kind that people wrote stories about, but the quiet kind that grew in small, unnoticed gestures, a smile offered at the right moment, a hand held just long enough to matter, a note left for someone who had lost hope. Even now, as the citadel's walls seemed to close gently around him, he was aware of the world in this same way. The faint hums in the ceiling, the shadows that moved just slightly differently than his own, the distant sound of other Mortys talking without realizing their voices carried. These were all companions to him, each one part of a larger, softer story that unfolded in silence. And in this silence, he felt an unexpected comfort, as if he had always belonged here and had merely been waiting for the right moment to remember it. In his childhood, he had learned to stretch himself in small ways, not to reach higher shelves or grab things from across the room, but in the way he listened, the way he held space for others. When a friend felt sad, he seemed to expand slightly as though he could make room in his chest for both his own worries and theirs. When someone was afraid, he could extend a kind of quiet warmth that made the edges of the world softer. It was an unusual skill, not measured in charts or grades, but it became part of him, subtle and constant, like the slow turning of stars in the night sky. He remembered the first time he had realized this gift. A younger Morty, smaller even than he had been trembling beside a corridor door, unsure of what to do. Without thinking, he had crouched down, softly humming a tune that he barely remembered learning, and waited. The tremor in the other Morty's chest slowly eased. The tightness in his hands loosened. And in that moment, he understood something quietly profound. Small things, offered gently and without expectation, could change the world in ways that roared silently. The Citadel was a strange place for a boy who preferred quiet corners. It was full of motion, full of plans and projects, and sometimes pointless rush, but it also held hidden rooms where forgotten things lingered, and corners where the air softened in strange ways. He liked those spaces best, and as he moved further into the walls, he found that even those secret spaces had stories he could feel rather than hear. Each pulse of light, each tiny vibration underfoot, each faint echo of a distant voice. These were all words, if one knew how to listen, and he did know how to listen. He had learned over many small years that listening was an act of care. Not just hearing, but truly hearing, feeling the shape of someone's sadness, noticing the curve of joy in their voice, understanding the rhythm of moments that no one else would pause to notice. The walls seemed to recognize this. They let him pass more easily than he had ever expected, stretching open in small, welcoming gestures, not as solid barriers, but as companions in an unspoken journey. There was no hurry. The night stretched endlessly, and he stretched with it, moving gently, almost floating, as if the gravity in this part of the world had softened. The faint glow of distant windows created pools of light that seemed to wait for him. Sometimes he paused, touching the walls, feeling the faint vibration of time passing, feeling the heartbeat of the citadel itself. Each step was a quiet affirmation, each small movement a meditation. And he realized without alarm that he was not leaving. He was arriving somewhere that had always existed, somewhere that had waited for him to notice it. Outside the walls, life continued as it always had. Mortys and Ricks went about their routines, rarely aware of the soft changes occurring behind unnoticed doors. But in this quiet space, the young Morty who stretched with empathy, who listened with his heart, who hummed small, gentle lullabies to himself, discovered something rare. A world that responded not to force or fear, but to care, to quiet attention, to presence, and he felt at peace, fully present in a space that had never demanded anything but for him to exist. He paused at a small nook where the walls curved inward to form a tiny room no larger than a closet. Here the echoes were softer, the light gentler. He leaned back against the wall, feeling it press just enough to support him, and let his eyes drift upward to the faint glow of stars seen through a tiny crack above. The hum of the citadel became a lullaby. The whispers of distant Mortys became gentle words of welcome. He smiled softly, not out of pride or triumph, but out of quiet understanding that he had found a place where he could be entirely himself. A space where his small acts of care mattered, even if no one else ever knew. And so slowly, as the night deepened and the stars outside flickered like distant, patient eyes, he stretched further, quietly merging with the walls, feeling the pulse of the citadel flow through him. There was no fear. There was no hurry. There was only presence, only warmth, only the gentle knowledge that he belonged. And somewhere, not far away, another Morty might notice the soft traces of his passage, feel the quiet reassurance left behind, and pause to breathe a little easier in the vast, quiet expanse of the world. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man. The citadel had a way of moving slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if time itself had softened inside its walls. Morty had learned to follow its rhythm, noticing the faint differences between one corridor and another, the subtle shift in light, the quiet echo of distant voices. He wandered these halls not to escape, but to explore, to notice what others passed by. Each day, he discovered a small wonder hidden in plain sight, a feather caught in a vent, the faint scent of morning bread from a distant kitchen, or the way sunlight refracted through a high window onto a dusty floor. Even when the other Mortys were rushing, trying to keep up with the endless errands and expectations of citadel life, he moved with his own gentle pace. He had learned that the world did not always need loud gestures or rapid movement. Sometimes the most meaningful things could only be seen when one slowed down enough to notice them. He would pause at doorways to listen, not to spy, but to simply understand. Voices carried stories, small, half-forgotten fragments of laughter or worry, and he had become very good at hearing them. There was a small courtyard, tucked between two towers, almost hidden from the usual paths, and Morty liked to spend time there. It was a strange little space, with cracked stone tiles and a single bent tree that seemed to have been growing there for centuries. The sunlight fell softly across the courtyard in patches, warming the corners without overwhelming them. Here, Morty could sit for hours, sketching clouds, humming a tune, or simply breathing in the quiet. Other Mortys occasionally wandered past, their movements hurried and precise, but he never felt lonely. The walls themselves seemed to remember him, their gentle embrace offering a kind of companionship no one else could see. It was in this courtyard that he first noticed a younger Morty sitting alone on a cold stone step, fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve. The boy's eyes were wide, unsure, scanning the courtyard as if he might disappear at any moment. Morty approached slowly with that characteristic patience he had learned over the years. He didn't rush, he didn't demand attention. Instead, he crouched a little distance away, humming softly in a tune he had made up long ago, letting the music fill the air without expecting the other to respond. The younger Morty's eyes softened, curiosity replacing fear. He didn't speak at first. Words were not necessary. Morty simply extended a quiet presence, a kind of warmth that wrapped around the small courtyard and lingered in the cracks of the stone tiles. After a while, the younger boy reached for a small pebble, rolling it between his fingers, and Morty mirrored him with another. It was a silent conversation, a gentle dance of presence and attention. And in that small exchange, a bond formed, delicate and patient, like a thread weaving two hearts together without the clamor of words. Morty had learned, even at his age, that understanding hearts was far more important than understanding instructions or explanations. He could see sadness in the tilt of a head, joy in a subtle smile, uncertainty in the way fingers twisted or feet tapped. These small gestures carried more truth than all the words in the Citadel libraries, and he had begun to understand, through experience and quiet reflection, that his own peculiar stretching ability was not just about moving his body in strange ways, but about extending himself emotionally, making room for the feelings of others without losing his own sense of self. In the courtyard, time seemed to fold. Morty noticed the way shadows grew longer as the sun drifted lazily across the sky. He noticed the way the younger Morty's hands began to relax, the small tremors in his chest slowing with each gentle hum. The citadel itself seemed to lean closer, listening, observing, offering the softest encouragement. Here, in this hidden pocket of the world, Morty realized that even small gestures of care could ripple outward, unseen but undeniably felt. Sometimes Morty would walk along the higher levels of the citadel, where corridors seemed impossibly long and the walls curved in ways that defied logic. Here he could look down into the lives of other Mortys and Ricks, watching brief moments that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. One Morty helped another pick up fallen papers. A small group shared a quiet joke that made their eyes crinkle in delight. Even the most mundane actions, when observed with attention and care, became small miracles. Morty absorbed these quietly, letting them settle into his chest, a gentle reminder that the world, even in its chaos, held beauty and connection everywhere. He remembered a lesson from an older Morty who had once found him staring at the clouds for hours. "Sometimes," the older one had said softly, "you don't need to fix the world, Morty. You just need to notice it and care. That's enough." Those words had lodged themselves deep inside him, a quiet compass guiding each step. And so he walked, he watched, he listened, always stretching gently to make room, always humming the tune he had carried for years and day. He found a tiny creature trapped in a corner of the courtyard, a small insect struggling against the cracks in the stone. Others might have ignored it or brushed it aside without thought, but Morty knelt down, his hands soft, and helped it to a safer place. The creature paused, as if sensing his care, before crawling into the shade. Morty smiled faintly, feeling a deep warmth bloom in his chest. This was the kind of heroism he understood. Quiet, unnoticed, patient, infinitely compassionate. As the citadel lights shifted from warm afternoon glow to the soft amber of evening, Morty returned to his favorite nook near the bent tree. He looked around, noticing again the small things. A leaf curled in a way he hadn't seen before, a faint shadow moving with the rhythm of the wind, the distant hum of conversations carried through narrow corridors. Each detail reminded him of the invisible threads that connected lives, the tiny acts of care that often went unseen but mattered more than anything loud or flashy. He hummed his familiar tune, letting it drift over the courtyard and into the distant halls, where other Mortys paused for just a moment, catching the soft sound without knowing why it made their hearts feel lighter. The younger Morty, still nearby, had curled a little closer to the stone step, watching him with quiet admiration. Morty didn't speak, didn't need to. The bond they shared was quiet, subtle, yet as deep as any shouted declaration. And when night fell, the courtyard softened further, bathed in the gentle glow of distant lights that seemed to float in mid-air. Morty stretched lightly, feeling the pulse of the world around him, the quiet rhythm of the citadel, and the warmth of connection that had grown in the space between him and the younger Morty. He knew that these small gestures, these moments of attention, were what truly mattered. Not victories, not recognition, not loud triumphs, but the quiet presence of care, the patient shaping of hearts, the soft unfolding of life in unnoticed corners. As he lay back against the stone beneath the bent tree, he let the music of the world wash over him. The hums, the whispers, the distant laughter, the faint movements of unseen creatures all became a lullaby, a gentle reminder that he belonged, that he was seen, even when no one else noticed. And somewhere in the quiet, the younger Morty's eyes grew heavy, eyelids drooping in a calm surrender to sleep, guided by the soft, steady presence of someone who truly understood him. "Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man." Morty had learned that the citadel was full of spaces that seemed to exist just beyond ordinary attention, hidden folds of hallways and rooms where the air carried a softer rhythm. He had discovered long ago that not all power was loud or visible. Some power stretched quietly, like the branches of a tree leaning toward the sun, or the ripple of light across a still pond. In Morty's case, it was literal. Too, he could stretch, expand himself, not in ways that drew attention, but in ways that made room for other hearts, absorbing the shape of their anxieties, their joys, their uncertainties. He had never told anyone about it because he didn't need to. The stretching was a private thing, a gentle skill that bloomed when he needed it most. Sometimes it happened when he noticed a Morty crying quietly behind a door, or when a rush of fear passed through a group, unnoticed but present. Morty would lean, extend, soften himself in small, subtle ways, and the tension would ease, not in a dramatic, world-saving gesture, but in the almost imperceptible pulse of calm that followed him. One afternoon, He wandered through the higher corridors of the citadel, places he rarely explored. Here, the walls leaned inward slightly, and the tiles underfoot had the faint glimmer of old polish. Morty liked the quiet that came in these corridors, the way sound curved around the corners and softened. He paused by a small window, looking out at a cluster of buildings that stretched like a muted maze into the distance. The sun reflected off the rooftops, casting tiny golden pools into the air, and he imagined the light carrying stories of every small act of care and attention that had ever happened in these hidden spaces. As he continued, he noticed a Morty sitting alone on a high ledge, legs dangling over the side, head bowed as if he had been carrying the weight of 1,000 invisible worries. Morty approached slowly, humming the same quiet tune he had learned in childhood, the one that always seemed to soften the edges of fear. The young Morty looked up, startled at first, but there was no tension in Morty's presence. He crouched near the ledge, letting his attention expand in a gentle embrace without speaking, without asking for anything in return. He could feel the boy's heartbeat, rapid and uneven, and without even thinking, he stretched slightly, a literal extension of his self, a soft widening of space around the boy so that the weight he carried became easier to bear. The effect was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it worked. Slowly, the tense shoulders relaxed, the breathing grew smoother, and the boy's gaze softened. Morty smiled faintly, a tiny private victory, the kind that left no footprints but mattered deeply nonetheless. The hallway they occupied was quiet, almost reverent. Dust motes drifted lazily through beams of sunlight, carrying no urgency, only stillness. Morty watched the small motions of the city below through the window, other Mortys rushing about, Ricks moving with purpose, small objects shifting in unnoticed ways. It all seemed to happen at the wrong speed for the world, but at the right speed for him. He realized that his stretching, his ability to make room, was not just about comforting others. It was about observing, understanding, and aligning himself with the quiet flow of life, letting it move through him instead of against him. Later, in a forgotten courtyard, filled with cracked tiles and a lone bent tree, Morty practiced small stretches of another kind, emotional stretches, testing how far he could reach without breaking himself. He leaned against the stone walls, letting his hands and feet extend in unusual directions, feeling the pull and release of tension. Each stretch reminded him of patience, of the careful balance between offering too much and too little. He thought of the younger Morty he had comforted earlier, imagining how these small lessons might ripple out, affecting the world in ways no one could measure. The tree in the courtyard had always fascinated him. Its branches twisted in strange directions, curling toward the sun and away from the wind, like a living map of persistence. Morty often imagined that if he could stretch enough, he might touch those branches with his thoughts, feel the slow growth of the tree, the patient unfolding of each leaf. And in that moment, he understood that the tree and he shared something fundamental. Neither sought attention, neither demanded recognition, but both grew quietly, steadily, with an almost imperceptible grace. Sometimes his stretching led him to discoveries he hadn't expected. A loose tile revealed a tiny hidden compartment beneath it. A forgotten poster held a faint, hand-drawn map of the citadel corridors that no one else had noticed. Morty would study these quietly, moving his thoughts across the paper, imagining the lives of those who had left these small marks. It was a reminder that everything, no matter how small or hidden, mattered. And he learned that in noticing, in being present, he could connect not only with other Mortys, but with the essence of the place itself, the pulse that made the citadel alive. He remembered a conversation with his mentor, the older Morty who had once guided him through the quiet lessons of life. "Power isn't always about changing the world," the older one had said softly. Sometimes it's about changing the space around you, the way people feel in your presence. That's harder than any adventure. It takes patience, observation, and the courage to stretch without being seen. Morty had carried that lesson like a lantern, lighting his steps in corridors both literal and metaphorical. That evening, the courtyard became a place of ritual for him. He would stretch lightly, touch the walls, lean into the corners, and hum his private lullaby. The citadel seemed to respond, the shadows growing softer, the air itself humming with quiet energy. Sometimes he imagined that each act of stretching, each small extension of his presence, left a faint trace behind, a warm note that another Morty might stumble upon, a soft pulse of reassurance that everything was as it should be, even when no one was watching. And there were nights when he would lie beneath the bent tree, gazing at the patch of sky visible through a break in the walls. Stars shimmered faintly, distant and patient. Morty imagined his stretching abilities reaching out to them, connecting him with the broader rhythm of the universe. It was a quiet, meditative act, more than exercise or movement. It was communion. And as he breathed slowly, feeling the pulse of his own chest and the pulse of the world around him, he understood something simple but profound. Being present, offering small gestures of care, and stretching gently toward the needs of others was a kind of heroism, subtle but infinitely powerful. As night deepened, Morty's hum softened, blending with the distant echoes of the citadel. He knew that his power, his gift, was not something to boast of or demonstrate. It was a quiet presence, a gentle shaping of the world through attention, patience, and care. And somewhere beyond the courtyard, another Morty might pause mid-step, feeling a warmth they could not name, or a tension easing without explanation. A soft proof that the universe sometimes leaned gently in their favor. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. Morty had always felt the subtle presence of others before he truly saw them, a skill sharpened by years of moving quietly through the citadel. One evening, as shadows lengthened and the hum of distant corridors settled into a soft rhythm, he met a Morty who carried a calm unlike any he had encountered. The older one was neither loud nor commanding, but there was a quiet certainty in his movements, a deliberate patience that made the air itself feel softer. Morty recognized immediately that this was someone he could learn from, though he didn't yet know how. The older Morty had a gentle way of noticing everything without pressing too hard, observing with eyes that seemed to weigh each detail and find meaning in small gestures. When he spoke, it was in whispers that felt almost like music, the kind of words that settle slowly into the chest rather than the ears. Morty felt drawn to him, not by urgency or excitement, but by the quiet warmth that radiated from someone who had truly understood the subtle pulse of life. They began walking together through the citadel corridors, steps measured, unhurried, following paths that seemed invisible to anyone else. The older Morty led him to small, hidden rooms where the walls leaned in protectively, and the light was soft enough to make the dust in the air shimmer like tiny stars. Sometimes, the older one said gently, you don't need to fix anything. You just need to notice, listen, be present. That's where the real changes happen. Morty understood this immediately, though it took weeks for him to internalize. Presence, patience, the act of noticing without rushing. These became the foundation of everything he would do. They spent hours in quiet observation, moving through forgotten corners of the citadel, where tiles were cracked and walls whispered stories of the past. The older Morty would point out subtle gestures, how a small creature paused mid-step, how shadows curled in a corner, how the faintest hum of pipes created rhythms unnoticed by most. Morty learned to see life not in grand displays, but in these small, delicate movements. He began to understand that each tiny detail, each quiet action, mattered far more than anything visible or loud. One evening, they reached a courtyard filled with broken tiles and twisted plants. The sun had begun to dip, casting long golden shadows across the stones. "Here," said the older Morty softly, "is where you can practice stretching beyond yourself. Not just your body, but your presence, your care, your attention." Morty tilted his head, curious but unafraid. The older one knelt, demonstrating a subtle movement of hands and feet, stretching toward a patch of sunlight, a way of letting his own energy expand to meet the world. Morty mirrored him, discovering the quiet magic of extending himself, of making room for others without effort or fanfare. It was a slow lesson, measured in minutes and hours rather than words or instructions. Morty learned to stretch his awareness, his empathy, to sense the small tremors in other Mortys' hearts, to notice when something unseen needed care. The older Morty would hum softly as he moved, a tune so quiet that it seemed almost like a whisper of the walls themselves. Morty hummed along, feeling the vibrations in his chest, feeling a soft connection to the world that went beyond sight or sound. They discovered corners of the citadel where light fell in golden slants through high windows, and here the older Morty taught him patience. "Notice the small things," he said. "The curl of a leaf, the tilt of a head, the way a shadow pauses. There is wisdom in everything if you slow down enough to see it." Morty listened, absorbed every detail, and felt the pulse of the citadel align with his own. Stretching became not just a motion, but a meditation, an act of care, a bridge between himself and the world. As the days passed, Morty observed more than he acted, and yet each observation became a gentle act of heroism. He would help a Morty struggling to carry books by subtly adjusting the weight in his presence, easing tension without anyone noticing. He would hum quietly in corridors where fear lingered, and the hum alone seemed to settle restless hearts. The older Morty never intervened overtly, but the lessons were clear: small gestures, patient presence, careful observation. These were the ways one could change the world without force. Morty also began to see the quiet ways others responded. A Morty who had been tense would pause and breathe more easily. A flicker of light would shift as if acknowledging care. The citadel itself seemed to recognize the rhythm, softening in response, offering a subtle affirmation that presence mattered, that empathy mattered, that the quiet work of hearts was as real as any grand adventure. One evening, as twilight draped the courtyard in a velvet glow, the older Morty said softly, "You are learning, Morty. But remember, you are not alone in this. Every Morty here carries a piece of this quiet power. Some just need guidance to notice it. Some will never notice it. But your role is to be present, to stretch, to offer room for others. That is your gift." Morty nodded, feeling the weight of understanding settle gently over him, warm and grounding. The days turned into weeks, and Morty continued to follow his mentor, absorbing the quiet teachings like a sponge, yet never feeling hurried or pressured. He learned that growth was not a race, that patience shaped the strongest hearts, that a gentle presence could ripple outward in ways that the eye could not measure but the soul could feel. Stretching became second nature, a rhythm in his chest, a pulse in his hands, a silent hymn of care that traveled with him wherever he went, and sometimes, when no one was watching, he would pause beneath a cracked archway, close his eyes and feel the pulse of the citadel itself, the pulse of lives interwoven with his own. He realized that his mentor had given him more than lessons. He had given him a lens through which to see, a heart attuned to subtle harmonies, a way to measure time and presence not in clocks or schedules, but in the quiet unfolding of care and understanding. As night fell, the courtyard shimmered in soft hues of amber and grey. Morty lay back beneath the twisted tree, feeling the warmth of the day linger in the stone beneath him. He hummed softly, extending his presence through the courtyard, through the halls, through the subtle rhythms of the citadel. Somewhere, another Morty might pause mid-step, feeling a small easing of tension, a soft reassurance. And he knew that this was proof enough of the quiet power he carried. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. Morty had begun to notice that even small gestures could leave lasting impressions. The citadel was a place filled with hurried Mortys, each preoccupied with their own routines, their own worries, their own fleeting fears. Yet in the quiet corners, in the hallways that curved slightly differently, in the courtyards where sunlight pooled softly, Morty had begun to understand that his presence could ripple outward. It was not a grand or flashy influence, but subtle, a gentle touch that shifted the rhythm of hearts around him. One day, as he wandered through a corridor lined with cracked tiles, he found a younger Morty sitting alone on a small step, his head bowed as if carrying invisible weights. The boy looked uncertain, fidgeting with his hands, eyes darting toward every passerby as if expecting disappointment. Morty crouched nearby, humming softly in the tune he had carried for years. The melody was slow and warm, almost imperceptible, but it seemed to settle the tension in the air. The younger Morty glanced up, curiosity flickering in his eyes, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small sigh of relief. Morty extended himself subtly, stretching not his limbs alone but the space around his presence, creating a quiet room of comfort. The boy relaxed, shoulders easing, chest rising and falling more evenly. Morty smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of connection spread gently through his chest. He realized that bonds could form in silence, in the simple act of noticing someone's need and responding without demand. There was no conversation, no instruction, no rush, only the quiet presence of care. The days that followed became a gentle rhythm of quiet gestures. Morty would leave small notes for others, tiny messages of reassurance written on scraps of paper hidden in corners. Sometimes he would rearrange small objects, subtly adjusting the environment to ease tension or create order where there had been confusion. Other Mortys, unaware of his efforts, would pause in the momentary calm, feeling only that the world seemed slightly softer, slightly lighter. Morty did not need acknowledgement. The effects themselves were enough. In the evenings he often returned to the courtyard with the bent tree, where shadows pooled across cracked stones and the air shimmered with fading sunlight. The younger Morty he had comforted now sometimes joined him, sitting quietly nearby, observing rather than speaking. Morty taught him the rhythm of presence without words, showing how small gestures, a hand rested lightly on a railing, a humming tune offered in passing, could convey warmth more profoundly than explanations. Together, they learned the delicate art of connecting without noise, of creating comfort in silence. One afternoon, Morty discovered a small creature trapped beneath a loose tile in the hallway. It struggled quietly, and Morty knelt beside it, extending his fingers gently, guiding the creature to safety. The act was unremarkable to anyone who passed by, yet it carried the same weight as 1,000 words of comfort. He thought of the younger Morty observing him, learning that true care need not be loud or visible, only consistent and attentive. And when the creature scurried safely into a shadowed nook, Morty smiled softly, feeling the invisible thread of connection strengthen between him, the world, and those around him. He began to notice subtle changes in the environment as well. Tiles that had once felt cold now seemed to warm slightly under his touch. Shadows shifted with a gentleness that had not been there before. It was not magic in the ordinary sense, but a reflection of his presence, a quiet confirmation that attention and care could shape the spaces we inhabit. He began to understand that the citadel itself was not indifferent. It responded to those who approached it with patience, empathy, and a willingness to stretch beyond themselves. One day, while moving along a hidden corridor near the upper levels, he encountered another Morty, slightly older, who seemed tense and impatient. The older boy's movements were quick, clipped and rigid. Morty approached cautiously, offering a soft hum, a gentle presence, and a faint smile. The older Morty slowed, shoulders relaxing slightly, the tension in his steps easing. It was a small victory, imperceptible to anyone else, but it reminded Morty that kindness and attention could ripple outward, reaching farther than the eye could see. Evenings were his favorite times. As the sun sank behind the distant citadel towers, Morty would lie beneath the bent tree, the younger Morty nearby, humming quietly. Sometimes they would trace the shapes of clouds visible through the high windows, imagining what stories the shadows might carry. Sometimes they simply breathed together in shared silence. In these moments, Morty realized that connection was not always spoken. It was felt in the spaces between gestures, in the pauses, in the quiet stretching of presence that made room for someone else's heart. He thought often of his mentor, the older Morty who had first shown him the quiet power of observation and attention. Small acts, his mentor had said, are more important than grand gestures. Presence matters, care matters, stretching for others matters. Morty had carried these words into every corridor, every courtyard, every hidden nook of the citadel. And now, as he guided others gently, he began to understand that teaching was less about instruction and more about modeling the rhythm of presence. The younger Morty began to mirror these lessons naturally. He would hum quietly in the hallways, notice small gestures, offer subtle warmth to those who seemed tense. Morty felt a gentle pride, not the kind that sought recognition, but the kind that settles softly in the chest, a warmth of shared understanding and quiet growth. Together they moved through the citadel like gentle currents, leaving traces of reassurance and soft energy wherever they went, even at night. When most of the citadel had fallen into silence, Morty continued to stretch. Not his body alone, but his awareness, his attention, his care. The walls seemed to hum softly in response, the shadows deepened without harshness, and the faint pulse of life around him carried the echo of kindness. He realized that bonds once formed could extend far beyond any single moment. A smile offered in a hidden corridor, a note left in silence, a gentle presence in a tense moment. These threads wove quietly, creating connections that endured. As twilight draped the courtyard in amber and violet, Morty and the younger Morty rested beneath the bent tree, shoulders brushing lightly, their breaths synchronizing in soft rhythm. The citadel around them pulsed with quiet life, and Morty hummed a lullaby so faint that it seemed almost like the walls themselves were humming along. He understood that love, care, and attention did not need to shout. They needed patience, observation, and the courage to reach gently toward another's heart. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the high windows of a rarely used corridor, Morty discovered a small door he had never noticed before. It was tucked behind a faded tapestry, almost invisible unless one slowed down enough to see its edges. The handle was cool under his fingers, and the door opened with a soft creak, as if exhaling a long-held secret. Beyond it lay a room filled with forgotten things, scraps of paper, discarded trinkets, and faded drawings. The air smelled faintly of dust and warmth, of memory waiting patiently to be noticed. Morty stepped inside and felt the walls close around him gently, not to confine, but to embrace. Sunlight pooled through a tiny window, illuminating motes of dust that swirled lazily like slow dancing spirits. Each item in the room seemed to carry a story, though none of them spoke aloud. He moved slowly, letting his eyes linger on the corners, tracing the outlines of sketches made by hands long forgotten. The images were simple: clouds, small creatures, abstract shapes, a fleeting attempt to capture something that had passed too quickly to name. And yet they felt alive, vibrant with the echoes of those who had once been present. He picked up a small piece of paper with faded ink and traced it gently with his fingers. It felt warm, imbued with intention and care. Morty realized that even unnoticed gestures could hold quiet power, a resonance that lingered long after the moment had passed. The room itself seemed to hum softly in response, acknowledging the presence of someone who understood how to truly see, how to recognize the significance in the smallest of things. Sitting down on a worn cushion in the corner, Morty let his mind drift over the images and objects. He remembered the younger Morty in the courtyard, the moments they had shared in silent connection, the gentle stretching of his own presence to make room for others. Each act, each gesture, no matter how small, seemed to ripple outward through time and space, leaving a faint trace in places no one else could reach. The room of memories became a mirror, reflecting the quiet heroism of these small, unrecorded moments. As he explored further, he found a tiny music box half covered in dust. Morty wound it slowly, and a soft, delicate melody filled the room, notes trembling in the quiet air. He closed his eyes and let the sound carry him, feeling it resonate not just in his ears, but in his chest. The melody seemed to echo across years, touching the hearts of Mortys who had come and gone, bridging moments otherwise forgotten. And in that soft resonance, Morty understood the unspoken truth of the room. Memory, even when hidden or overlooked, carries life forward, connecting hearts across space and time. He lingered on a small shelf where old sketches were stacked, each one depicting fleeting moments of care. A Morty offering a flower to another, a faint smile caught in a shadow, a hand extended toward a creature in need. These images, though faint and fragile, told stories of kindness, of attention, of quiet courage. Morty felt a warmth bloom in his chest as he realized that even the smallest act of care could be preserved, remembered, and felt long after it had passed. Each sketch was a whisper, a gentle reminder that presence mattered more than recognition. The longer he stayed, the more he noticed the rhythm of the room itself. Dust motes drifted in patterns that seemed deliberate, shadows curved with a soft awareness, and the faint hum of distant corridors carried through the walls in delicate waves. Morty felt as if the room was alive, responding to his presence, acknowledging his understanding, and inviting him to linger. He stretched quietly, not just physically, but emotionally, letting himself expand into the space, feeling the pulse of memory and care merge with his own heartbeat. He found a small mirror, its surface slightly tarnished. Looking at himself, he didn't see just a boy or a Morty. He saw the accumulation of small gestures, the quiet ripples of care he had offered, the bonds he had begun to form. And he saw the potential for more, the possibility that every act of presence could shape the world in ways that were gentle yet profound. The reflection was a reminder that growth often happens slowly, invisibly, and that patience and attention were the true markers of strength. As he moved to leave, Morty lingered at the doorway, glancing back once more. The sunlight had shifted, casting long golden slants across the floor, illuminating the edges of sketches and objects with a warmth that felt almost sacred. He realized that the room of memories would always exist as a quiet refuge, a space where attention and care could be preserved and felt, even when the world outside was hurried and indifferent. The memory of this room and the resonance of the moments within it would travel with him wherever he went. Walking back through the Citadel corridors, Morty noticed details he had never truly seen before. The curve of a shadow, the tilt of a window, the faint glimmer of light on a tile, all seemed to carry echoes of memory, reminders that even unnoticed things could have significance. He hummed softly, feeling the gentle pulse of the room within him, a rhythm that aligned with the citadel itself. It was a quiet harmony, a slow unfolding of awareness that he could carry into every interaction, every gesture, every stretch of his presence. That evening, in the courtyard beneath the bent tree, Morty shared nothing of the room of memories aloud. Words were unnecessary. The younger Morty sat beside him, and they hummed together, their voices blending with the faint rustle of leaves and the soft shift of shadows. In silence, Morty felt the lessons of the hidden room take root, that attention, care, and presence could create lasting bonds, that small gestures held power, and that even in the quietest corners, life carried meaning. As twilight settled across the courtyard, he stretched lightly, feeling the soft pulse of connection in his hands and chest, the rhythm of his own heartbeat echoing the unspoken music of the citadel. Somewhere nearby, other Mortys might pause in their steps, sensing the calm he carried without ever understanding why. The echoes of the room of memories had found their way into the world, subtle yet undeniable, a gentle imprint of care, attention, and quiet growth. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man. The citadel had a rhythm all its own, a pulse that flowed through hallways and courtyards alike, and Morty had begun to notice it more keenly than ever before. Each corridor whispered its own story, each shadow held a secret movement, and each tile beneath his feet seemed to carry memory from days long past. It was in these quiet, overlooked places that Morty found the truest magic, not in loud displays, but in subtle gestures and patient attention. He wandered down a narrow passage where the walls leaned inward just slightly, creating a small private tunnel of light and shadow. Morty hummed softly, the tune carrying faintly through the corridor like a thread of warmth. A small creature scurried across the floor, pausing to look at him before disappearing into a crack. Morty smiled, recognizing the gentle acknowledgement of presence. Here, the citadel responded not to urgency or action, but to patience, attention, and quiet care. In the distance, he heard the soft shuffle of footsteps, a hurried Morty moving with the weight of unseen concerns. Morty did not call out. He simply extended himself subtly, his presence widening in a small, imperceptible way. The tension in the approaching Morty's posture eased slightly, shoulders relaxing, breath softening. It was not dramatic or noticeable to anyone else, but Morty knew the impact had been real. Small acts carried quietly could ripple further than one might expect. He explored hidden corners, places where sunlight bent in strange angles through high windows. One courtyard had a fountain long unused, its water frozen in time, moss curling along the edges. Morty knelt beside it, touching the stone with careful attention, feeling the subtle vibration of age and memory. In his mind, he traced the lives of those who had passed by this fountain, moments of laughter, hesitation, care, and sorrow, all lingering invisibly in the air. Morty hummed, blending his presence with the quiet resonance of the space. In another corridor, he encountered a Morty struggling to carry a stack of books. Their edges threatened to slip with every step, and the boy's anxiety was almost tangible. Morty approached slowly, offering a gentle hum and a soft presence that seemed to make the air itself lighter. Without touching the books, he subtly guided the energy of the corridor, allowing the other Morty to find balance and calm. A small smile flickered across the boy's face, unspoken gratitude reflected in his eyes. Morty simply nodded, understanding that change did not require recognition. only the quiet act of offering space for relief. Evening brought longer shadows, softening the corners of courtyards and hallways. Morty returned to the bent tree, the space that had become his anchor in the vast, winding citadel. The younger Morty joined him, and together they watched the faint glow of distant windows, imagining the lives contained within. Morty hummed quietly, the younger one echoing him faintly. The music was simple, gentle and resonant, blending with the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of pipes. Each note carried presence, patience, and care. On a particularly quiet evening, Morty noticed a faint scratch on one of the courtyard stones, a small mark he had never seen before. He traced it gently with a fingertip, imagining the hand that had left it, the moment of intention behind the action. Perhaps it had been an accident, perhaps a deliberate mark, but in either case, Morty felt a connection to it, a thread stretching backward through time. He hummed softly, leaving a pulse of his own presence behind, a quiet acknowledgement of the past echoing in the present. He found a narrow staircase that led to an overlooked balcony, a place where the light fell in slanted gold, illuminating dust motes like tiny stars frozen in time. Morty stepped carefully, leaning lightly against the stone railing, feeling the pulse of the citadel beneath his fingertips. The city stretched far below, corridors branching endlessly, and he imagined the small, unseen gestures of countless Mortys carrying through these spaces. Acts of care, subtle heroism, unnoticed kindness. In these quiet acts, Morty realized, the world's true rhythm existed. He practiced stretching in this quiet place, extending his arms and legs, leaning gently, testing the boundaries of his presence. It was not a demonstration for anyone, nor an attempt at recognition. It was simply a meditation, a communion with the quiet heartbeat of the citadel itself. As he stretched, he felt his awareness expand subtly, reaching toward spaces and beings beyond immediate sight, creating a soft resonance that lingered even when he left. Morty often returned to the fountain courtyard after sunset, watching the faint glimmer of water reflect the deepening sky. Shadows stretched alongside him, curling over cracked tiles and moss, moving with gentle precision. He hummed quietly, a lullaby for the unseen, a gesture of care for the spaces that had been overlooked, the lives that had passed unnoticed. Even the citadel seemed to listen, the faint hum of distant corridors and the soft pulse of tiles beneath his feet resonating in acknowledgement. By the time twilight settled across the courtyards, Morty felt a quiet fullness in his chest, a calm certainty that small, gentle acts could ripple through unseen spaces. Presence, patience, and care, these were his tools, his rhythm, his quiet heroism. He understood that the citadel itself responded not to noise or urgency, but to hearts willing to stretch, to notice, to extend. And somewhere in the distance, a Morty paused mid-step. A subtle easing of tension carried through space, a small proof that quiet influence could shape the world. As he lay beneath the bent tree, the younger Morty beside him, they hummed together, breathing in sync with the gentle pulse of life around them. Shadows deepened without harshness, light softened to amber and violet, and the faint hum of distant corridors became oikai, lullaby of presence and patience. Morty stretched quietly one last time for the day, not to show, not to perform, but to offer a subtle expansion of care into the world. And somewhere, the citadel itself seemed to sigh softly in response, embracing the quiet heroism of unnoticed gestures. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man. The citadel felt different that morning, quieter somehow, as if it had paused to breathe. Morty wandered slowly through its corridors, listening to the faint echoes of distant footsteps, the soft hum of ventilation, and the subtle creak of old stone. He noticed small details he had never truly seen before. The way sunlight shifted across a tile, the tilt of a doorway, the flutter of a small paper caught in the wind. Each observation made him feel more rooted, more aware of the gentle pulse of the world around him. He came across a Morty sitting alone in a corner near a staircase, knees drawn to his chest, eyes fixed on the ground. Morty recognized the tension immediately. Without rushing, he crouched nearby, humming his quiet tune. The soft vibration of his presence seemed to reach into the younger boy, coaxing his shoulders to relax, his breathing to slow. He didn't speak, didn't demand attention. He simply existed beside him, offering a small sanctuary in the midst of the citadel's constant movement. The younger Morty looked up after a while, a faint flicker of trust in his eyes. Morty smiled gently and extended a hand, not for words, but for presence. The boy tentatively reached out, and the connection settled softly between them. In that quiet gesture, Morty understood something profound. Friendships were not always built on shared adventures or spoken stories, but on small moments of understanding, of noticing, of silent care. As they walked together through the upper corridors, Morty pointed out tiny things, a feather stuck in a vent, a crack in the stone that caught the light just so, a faint shadow moving across the floor like a living thread. The younger Morty began to notice them too, his curiosity unfolding slowly, tentatively. Morty hummed softly, and the two of them fell into an easy rhythm, a quiet dance of observation and presence. It was the sort of connection that did not need words, only patience and shared attention. Later, they reached a hidden courtyard where the sunlight fell in long, slanted beams. Morty guided the younger boy to sit beneath the bent tree, a place that had become a refuge for reflection. He demonstrated how to stretch quietly, not only the body but the presence, the space around them. The younger Morty mimicked him, leaning, extending, noticing how the act itself seemed to ease the tension in their hearts. They were not performing. They were simply being, allowing their care to ripple outward in subtle, unnoticeable ways. Morty also noticed the importance of listening. He could hear the faintest quiver in the voices of passing Mortys, the soft scrape of a foot against a tile that betrayed anxiety, the pause in a laugh that hinted at unease. Each observation became a gentle map, guiding his small acts of kindness. Sometimes it was a hum, sometimes a hand placed lightly on a railing, sometimes just a quiet nod. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, only presence, and each gesture seemed to reverberate quietly through the corridors. The younger Morty began to show signs of growth. His posture softened, his gaze lingered on small wonders, and he began humming softly alongside Morty. It was not the same tune, but a subtle echo, a mirror of the calm that had been offered to him. Morty felt warmth settle in his chest, not pride, not ownership, but the quiet joy of shared understanding. This was the rhythm of friendship in the Citadel, subtle, patient, unspoken, yet deeply resonant. As afternoon drifted into evening, they explored a long, winding hallway that Morty had never fully mapped. The walls leaned in and curved slightly, creating pockets of shadow that softened the light. Morty pointed out the patterns of the shadows, the gentle shift of air currents, the faint scent of bread from a distant kitchen. The younger Morty followed his gaze, noticing the details he had once ignored. They moved together like currents of presence, stretching gently through the spaces, leaving soft traces of attention in their wake. Sometimes, Morty paused to reflect quietly, thinking of the older mentor who had first guided him. He understood now that mentorship was not about giving answers, but about modeling patience, care, and presence. Friendship, too, followed this rhythm. One did not force understanding. One offered attention, waited and let the connection unfold naturally. Morty hummed a soft, wandering tune, as they sat beneath the tree, feeling the pulse of shared space, the subtle bond of hearts aligned in gentle awareness. Night fell softly over the citadel, shadows deepening without harshness, light fading into amber and violet. Morty and the younger boy lay back on the cracked tiles, shoulders brushing lightly, breathing in sync with the rhythm of the world around them. They hummed together, a quiet duet that merged with the faint hum of distant corridors and the whisper of leaves. Morty felt a profound calm settle in him, a sense of quiet accomplishment that required no applause, only acknowledgement of the present moment. In these moments, Morty realized that quiet friendships, built on observation, presence, and small acts of care, were among the most profound treasures. Words were optional. Attention was essential. A hand extended in silence, a hum shared softly, a glance that truly saw another being. These were the foundations of connection, and Morty understood that he would carry these lessons forever, weaving them into his every interaction, every gesture, every stretch of his presence. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man. The citadel seemed heavier that morning, though nothing had changed outwardly. Morty felt it in the way the hallways echoed differently, in the faint stiffness of shadows, in the subtle pull of the air that seemed almost tense. He wandered slowly, humming his familiar tune, noticing the weight in the corridors and the slight hesitation in the movements of passing Mortys. Something had shifted, and while there was no danger, there was a quiet challenge, the invisible resistance of unseen worries that required more care than usual to ease. He found a younger Morty near the staircase, shoulders hunched and eyes downcast. The boy's usual curiosity was clouded by a subtle anxiety, as though a small shadow had settled on his chest. Morty crouched nearby, humming softly, allowing the vibrations of his presence to reach the boy without intrusion. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension in the other Morty's body eased. Morty realized that sometimes the world presented obstacles not in dramatic moments, but in subtle shifts requiring patience, awareness, and quiet action. Walking through the upper corridors, Morty noticed the way the shadows clung more densely in certain corners, how the air seemed to carry the faint scent of fatigue or worry. He extended himself, not in motion alone, but in presence, stretching his awareness gently to fill the empty spaces with calm. Morty had learned that care was not always a visible act. Sometimes it was a quiet hum, a small shift in posture, a soft gesture that left no trace but still rippled through the atmosphere. He came across a Morty, struggling with a stack of papers that threatened to topple with each step. The boy's frustration was quiet but palpable, his small movements trembling under the weight of expectation. Morty approached calmly, offering a subtle presence rather than a hand. He leaned slightly, letting the tension of the corridor align with his own rhythm, and the papers seemed to settle more easily in the boy's grasp. A faint smile flickered, small but real. Morty knew the world had not changed. Only the subtle shift of care had allowed a moment of relief. Later, he returned to the courtyard with the bent tree, the space where he often reflected. The younger Morty joined him, moving more cautiously than usual. Morty demonstrated stretching again, slow and deliberate, extending both body and presence. He encouraged the younger boy to mirror him, not to compete, not to perform, but to sense the rhythm of calm that could be shared through patient alignment. They leaned, reached, and breathed together, the quiet pulse of their presence weaving gently through the courtyard. Sometimes challenges came not from action, but from observation. Morty noticed a Morty sitting alone near a cracked fountain, eyes distant, hands fidgeting with nothing. He crouched nearby, humming softly, letting his presence settle like a gentle warmth. The other boy's gaze met his briefly, and Morty extended subtly, offering space and patience. No words were exchanged, yet the boy's posture softened, shoulders easing, breath slowing. Morty understood that the world often required heroism that could not be shouted or demonstrated, only quietly, consistently offered. The older mentor's words echoed in his mind. True strength is not in action alone. It is in presence, attention, and care. It is in extending yourself without expectation, in creating space for others to breathe and grow. Morty felt these lessons anchor him in the present moment. Challenges in the Citadel were not always loud or visible. They were often subtle, existing in the hesitations of others, the faint resistance in the air, the shadows that lingered, and the response required patience, awareness, and quiet influence. Evening fell, casting long amber shadows across cracked tiles and bent tree branches. Morty and the younger boys sat side by side, humming softly. Their voices blended with the faint rustle of leaves, the distant hum of hallways, and the occasional whisper of wind. Morty realized that challenges could be met not with force, but with calm attention and gentle presence. The small acts of care offered today were invisible to most, yet they rippled through the Citadel in ways subtle but profound. As night deepened, Morty stretched gently beneath the bent tree, extending his awareness through the courtyard and into distant corridors. He imagined every small act of care, every gesture of presence, every hum shared, carrying forward like invisible threads, touching moments yet to come. Somewhere, a Morty paused mid-step, feeling a soft easing of tension without understanding why. Somewhere, another took a deeper breath, comforted by a quiet alignment of unseen forces. Morty felt a subtle warmth in his chest, a quiet confirmation that the world had shifted ever so slightly toward calm. He watched shadows pool beneath the tree, noticing the delicate movements of leaves, the faint glimmer of light on a tile, the ripple of air across mossed stones. All of it spoke to him in soft whispers. Presence mattered, patience mattered, small acts mattered. The challenges of the day, though subtle, had been met not with urgency, but with steady attention, quiet heroism, and the gentle stretching of heart and mind. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. The Citadel had its own rhythm at night, a slow pulse that seemed to hum beneath the footsteps of those moving quietly through corridors. Morty wandered among shadows and beams of soft light, humming faintly, feeling the pulse in his chest align with the pulse beneath the stone tiles. There was an invisible current running through the place, connecting moments, presences, and hearts in ways no one else could see. Tonight, Morty wanted to follow it, to trace the subtle threads that bound the Citadel's inhabitants together. He moved toward the upper courtyards, where high windows let pale moonlight spill across broken tiles. Morty noticed the way shadows bent toward each other, almost imperceptibly, as if drawn to some unseen harmony. In these quiet hours, he could sense the subtle stirrings of emotion in the other Mortys: hesitation, curiosity, small bursts of joy, fleeting fears that had nowhere to settle. Morty stretched gently, allowing his awareness to reach outward, extending a presence that could ease tension without demanding attention or recognition. In a narrow corridor, he found a Morty leaning against the wall, eyes closed, hands pressed lightly to his chest. The young boy seemed caught between worry and hope, a faint quiver traveling through his small frame. Morty approached slowly, humming softly, letting the melody carry reassurance. He extended himself gently, not touching, not speaking, but filling the space around the boy with calm. The Morty's shoulders relaxed, breath evening out, and when he opened his eyes, they shone with quiet gratitude, though no words were exchanged. Morty realized that the Citadel was more than walls and corridors. It was a network of unseen connections, subtle threads linking moments, presences, and hearts. Each quiet act of care, each hum, Each extension of presence created resonance that traveled beyond immediate perception. The effect was slow, almost imperceptible, yet real. Morty could feel it, a soft current of warmth stretching through the citadel, connecting beings in ways words could not describe. He continued along the upper hallways, pausing at windows to watch distant towers glowing faintly under moonlight. He imagined all the Mortys moving through the spaces unseen, carrying their small acts of care, their tentative moments of courage. Some would never notice each other directly, yet their presence and attention intertwined, creating a quiet harmony that bound the citadel together. Morty understood that empathy, patience, and observation were as much a kind of superpower as any flashy ability, a force capable of shaping the environment subtly but profoundly. In a shadowed corner, he saw a group of Mortys huddled around a small, flickering light, whispering softly. The words were indistinct, but the warmth of connection was tangible. Morty approached cautiously, extending his awareness without intruding. The air seemed to lighten as he moved closer, the shadows pulling slightly toward the glow of their gathering. Morty hummed faintly, and the effect was subtle but undeniable. The tension in the room eased, the energy shifted toward calm, and a sense of safety settled over the small group. Later, he returned to the bent tree in the courtyard, the anchor point that had become a sanctuary in the vast, winding citadel. The younger Morty was already there, eyes tracing the patterns of the shadows, fingers lightly brushing the tiles. They hummed together softly, their notes blending with the faint pulse of distant hallways. Morty closed his eyes, feeling the subtle threads of connection that spread outward through their presence. He could sense the pull of empathy stretching into unseen corners, touching Mortys who had never seen him, affecting moments they could not name. He stretched again, slowly, deliberately, not just physically but emotionally. Every movement, every small extension of awareness created a ripple through the spaces around him. Morty imagined it reaching the corners of the citadel where loneliness lingered, touching beings who had not known care, shifting the energy subtly, imperceptibly. It was a quiet heroism, not marked by accolades or recognition, but by patience, attention, and the courage to reach beyond oneself into the hearts of others. Morty paused to observe the fountain in the courtyard. Long, unused, water frozen in place yet shimmering faintly in the moonlight. He imagined each ripple, each reflection, carrying a piece of his presence outward, touching every small hidden worry, every unseen fear, every quiet hope. His hums and stretches became a meditation, a deliberate act of care for the invisible threads connecting every Morty in the citadel. Each gesture reinforced the network of empathy he could feel pulsing beneath the surface. The night deepened, soft shadows merging into the folds of stone, air thick with calm. Morty lay beneath the bent tree, stretching gently one last time for the evening, feeling the pulse of the citadel move in tandem with his own. Somewhere far away, a Morty paused mid-step, sensing relief without knowing why. Somewhere else, a Morty felt a faint warmth in an empty room. Morty smiled softly, understanding that his quiet acts of care were shaping the citadel in ways he could neither see nor measure. He closed his eyes, letting the hum fade into silence, yet still feeling the presence of connection stretching outward like invisible threads of light. The citadel, in its quiet rhythm, responded in subtle harmony, and Morty understood that this was the deepest form of heroism, the patient, unseen work of extending empathy, presence, and care into the world. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. The citadel seemed unusually still that morning, as if holding its breath, waiting for something unseen to unfold. Morty wandered slowly through the upper corridors, humming softly, feeling the rhythm of the place align with his heartbeat. Yet, beneath the familiar calm, a subtle weight pressed against him, a quiet uncertainty that whispered doubts he hadn't noticed before. It was not fear exactly, but a hesitation, a question of whether his small acts of care truly mattered in a place so vast and indifferent. He paused near a broken window, the glass streaked with dust and faint fingerprints from unknown hands. Morty leaned lightly against the sill, observing the sunlight bending through it, catching motes of dust like tiny floating stars. He breathed slowly, letting the light fill him, and whispered to himself that presence, patience, and empathy were still his guides. Even when results were unseen, even when no one noticed, Morty realized that the quiet work he offered had value in itself, like planting seeds in soil whose bloom he might never witness. As he walked through a narrow hallway, he noticed a Morty sitting alone, shoulders tense, eyes focused on the cracked floor. The boy fidgeted with his hands, shifting uneasily as though the world itself was pressing too heavily against him. Morty crouched nearby, humming gently, letting the vibrations of his presence seep into the room. He extended his awareness subtly, reaching into the boy's quiet tension, offering a soft space where worry could settle and breathe. Slowly, the shoulders eased, the chest rose more evenly, and the Morty looked up, surprised at the calm that had appeared without a single word. The subtle doubt inside Morty lingered. However, a quiet murmur beneath the warmth of the courtyard sun. He realized that even acts of care and presence could feel small, fragile, insufficient in the face of the Citadel's enormity. Yet the lesson he had learned from his mentor returned to him. Heroism was not measured by recognition, by applause, or by visible change. It was measured by patience, observation, and the courage to extend oneself quietly, even when results were unseen. In the afternoon, he wandered to the bent tree in the central courtyard, the sanctuary that had become his anchor. The younger Morty joined him, noticing the subtle weight on his companion's expression. Without words, they sat together, humming in soft harmony, the vibration of presence connecting them through silence. Morty let the doubt move through him, acknowledging it, naming it quietly in his mind. He realized that even uncertainty could be met with calm attention, patience, and a gentle extension of care. Later, he found a narrow staircase leading to a balcony he had rarely visited. The light was soft, filtered through high windows, casting long, gentle shadows across the stone floor. Morty leaned lightly against the railing, closing his eyes and stretching his awareness outward. He imagined all the unseen Mortys in the Citadel, carrying small burdens, struggling quietly, and he offered them a soft thread of presence, extending empathy like a gentle current that could reach where words could not. A faint hum drifted through the balcony, rising from his chest and hands, blending with the muted rhythm of distant hallways. Morty imagined the invisible ripples traveling through corridors, over tiles, around corners, touching moments of hesitation, easing tension, offering a sense of calm where anxiety had taken root. He realized that even in doubt, even when his acts felt unnoticed, the quiet expansion of presence carried value, like soft light illuminating shadows that might otherwise remain unseen. Evening arrived with a slow, amber glow, stretching long shadows across the courtyard tiles. Morty and the younger boy lay beneath the bent tree, shoulders brushing lightly, breathing in sync. They hummed together, the notes intertwining with the faint hum of distant corridors, the rustle of leaves, and the subtle pulse of the Citadel itself. Morty felt the weight of doubt begin to lift, replaced by a quiet certainty that resilience was not loud or forceful, but calm, patient, and persistent. He recalled his mentor's voice, soft and deliberate. Strength is not measured by victories or accolades. Strength is in presence, attention, and care. Strength is in enduring quietly, offering space for others, and stretching beyond yourself even when the world feels indifferent. Morty breathed in deeply, letting the lessons settle in his chest. The doubts were still there, faint shadows at the edges, but they no longer defined him. Presence mattered. Patience mattered. Care mattered. As night settled, the courtyard shimmered in soft amber and violet. Morty stretched gently, letting his awareness expand into shadows and distant corridors, into the hidden spaces where unseen Mortys carried their burdens. Somewhere, a small easing of tension occurred. Somewhere, another Morty paused mid-step, feeling a faint warmth. Morty hummed softly, knowing that quiet resilience, patience, and persistent care were as powerful as any act of heroism, and that the threads of empathy he extended had touched more hearts than he could ever count. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man. Night had settled over the citadel like a slow, velvet curtain, softening corners and lengthening shadows. Morty wandered quietly through the corridors, humming a faint tune that blended with the distant, almost imperceptible pulse of the place. The citadel felt alive in a different way tonight, not with movement or urgency, but with memory, reflection, and quiet connection. Each step seemed to echo with moments of care he had extended, moments he had witnessed, and moments he could only imagine, leaving invisible threads stretching gently across the halls. He paused by a balcony overlooking the distant towers, the faint moonlight tracing the edges of stone and glass. Morty imagined every small act of kindness, every hum, every subtle stretch of presence, converging in the quiet spaces beyond his sight. It was like a river of soft light flowing through the citadel, unseen but undeniable, touching the hearts of Mortys who may never know why they felt the momentary ease, the faint warmth, the gentle reassurance. He breathed slowly, letting the pulse of these connections settle in his chest. Morty's mind drifted to memories of the older mentor who had first taught him about presence and patience. He remembered soft words spoken in quiet corridors, hands resting lightly on stone railings, and hums that carried reassurance without interruption. It was a rhythm he had carried ever since, a quiet song that guided him through the citadel. And tonight, in this soft, reflective hour, Morty realized that these threads of memory intertwined seamlessly with his own acts, connecting past, present, and even glimpses of futures not yet written. He wandered down a narrow corridor lined with forgotten sketches and trinkets, each imbued with faint echoes of the Mortys who had passed through before him. Morty moved slowly, tracing the edges of drawings with gentle fingers, imagining the hands that had left them, imagining the intention behind each small mark. Some sketches were of fantastical creatures, some of clouds, some of moments captured in fleeting detail. Each felt alive, resonating softly in the quiet hum of the corridor, a reminder that even unnoticed moments leave traces. A faint light glimmered from a doorway at the end of the hall. Morty approached and found a small room filled with soft, folded fabrics, forgotten books, and tiny mechanical devices whose purpose he could only guess. The objects seemed to vibrate faintly with memory, each one a quiet testament to presence and care. Morty settled on the floor, allowing his awareness to stretch into every corner of the room, imagining the hands and hearts that had interacted with these items, honoring the small yet significant histories they carried. He hummed gently, letting the melody extend outward into the hallway, into distant corridors, into courtyards where shadows pooled and leaves rustled softly. The hum carried subtle reassurance, aligning with the faint pulse of every Morty who had wandered the citadel tonight, easing tension, quieting worry, and knitting together invisible threads of connection. Morty realized that reflection was its own form of care, a soft act of attention that allowed him to honor the presence of others while strengthening his own. Eventually, he moved to the courtyard beneath the bent tree, a sanctuary that had become both anchor and mirror. The younger Morty joined him, sitting quietly with eyes tracing the patterns of light and shadow. They hummed in unison, a gentle duet that intertwined with the soft sigh of the wind, the subtle pulse of distant corridors, and the faint tremor of tiles beneath their fingertips. Morty realized that reflection, observation, and presence were inseparable, forming a quiet rhythm that linked them across time and space. He closed his eyes and imagined the citadel as a vast network of moments, small acts and subtle presences. Every hum, every stretch of attention, every soft smile or gesture of care had traveled far beyond immediate perception, leaving traces that could not be measured. Somewhere, a Morty paused mid-step and felt the faint easing of tension. Somewhere else, a shadow shifted just slightly, carrying with it the memory of kindness. Morty felt warmth bloom in his chest, knowing that even subtle influence could be powerful and enduring. As the night deepened, Morty stretched gently beneath the bent tree, extending both body and awareness into the shadows and quiet corners around him. He imagined the threads of memory and presence connecting past, present, and future Mortys, weaving a gentle tapestry of care. The pulse of the citadel responded softly, harmonizing with his breath, his hum, his quiet observation. In these moments, Morty felt the profound truth of his journey, that quiet heroism, empathy, and presence create echoes that reach far beyond what the eye can see. The courtyard shimmered in amber and violet under moonlight. Morty and the younger boy lay side by side, shoulders brushing, breathing in sync, humming together in soft harmony. Shadows shifted without harshness, leaves rustled faintly, and the hum of the citadel carried a lullaby of memory, care, and gentle connection. Morty smiled softly, understanding that reflection was not just remembering, but honoring, extending, and quietly shaping the world through awareness and empathy. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. The morning was soft, almost imperceptible, as sunlight spilled across the citadel in pale amber and gold. Morty wandered slowly through familiar corridors, feeling the warmth of the day brush against stone walls and tiles beneath his feet. There was a quiet stillness in the air, a sense that the citadel itself was settling, listening, and breathing along with him. Today, reflection felt heavier, richer, as though every small act, every quiet gesture, and every hum from the past carried weight and resonance. He paused in a narrow hallway, tracing the faint cracks in the walls with gentle fingers. Each mark felt like a memory, a small story left behind by those who had passed this way. Morty realized that these marks were part of the citadel's subtle history, evidence of presence, effort, and quiet care. He hummed softly, a gentle vibration that seemed to honor the echoes of previous Mortys, their small acts intertwining with his own, creating a quiet web of continuity and connection. The younger Morty joined him in the courtyard beneath the bent tree, a place that had become a sanctuary for reflection. They sat quietly, shoulders brushing lightly, breathing in sync with the rhythm of their surroundings. Morty encouraged the younger boy to extend his awareness, to notice the movement of shadows, the tilt of the sunlight, and the soft rustle of leaves. Together they observed the world not for action or recognition, but for understanding, presence, and care. In the distance, the faint hum of distant corridors reached them, mingling with their own quiet tune. Morty imagined all the unseen threads of kindness, care, and presence he had offered over time, stretching into unseen corners, touching moments that might never be acknowledged. He understood that the value of these acts was not in applause, recognition or results, but in their quiet persistence, in their subtle influence, and in the way they shaped both the giver and the receiver in unseen ways. He wandered to the fountain courtyard, where water shimmered faintly under the morning light, still and reflective. Morty knelt beside it, fingertips skimming the surface, imagining the countless tiny acts of care and presence that had passed through this space over the years. Each ripple seemed to carry forward, touching hearts, easing tension, and quietly knitting the citadel together. He understood that memory, empathy, and attention were not just personal, but universal, linking past, present, and future through subtle threads of continuity. Later, he explored hidden corners, places where light and shadow intertwined, revealing subtle patterns and textures he had never noticed before. Morty hummed softly, letting his presence fill the spaces gently, extending care into the forgotten and overlooked. He realized that the citadel itself responded to attention, that the environment, though silent, was alive in subtle ways. Presence, observation, and quiet care shaped it as surely as action and intention shaped individuals. The day wore on slowly, filled with observation, reflection, and gentle gestures. Morty guided the younger Morty through subtle stretches, shared soft hums, and quiet moments of noticing. They moved through the citadel as currents of presence, leaving traces of calm and care wherever they passed. Morty felt a deep warmth settle in his chest, not pride, but fulfillment, a sense that the quiet heroism of small acts and patient attention had accumulated into something lasting, something intangible yet real. As evening approached, shadows lengthened across the courtyard, softening the angles of tiles and branches, tilting light into golden and violet hues. Morty lay beneath the bent tree with the younger boy beside him, breathing in sync, humming a faint duet. The world seemed to pulse gently around them, a reflection of the care, presence, and empathy that had been quietly extended through time. Morty felt a gentle satisfaction, knowing that even small actions, unnoticed by most, left a subtle imprint on the citadel, shaping its rhythm and the hearts within it. He stretched gently, extending his awareness outward into shadows, corners, and distant hallways. He imagined every soft hum, every quiet gesture, every attentive glance he had offered over time, forming a gentle network that continued beyond him, touching those he might never meet. The citadel responded subtly, a soft harmony settling into its walls, its corridors, and its hidden corners. Morty understood that legacy was not measured in fame or spectacle, but in quiet, persistent care, the subtle shaping of the world with empathy and attention. As night settled fully over the citadel, Morty hummed one last time, letting the melody drift outward, merging with the pulse of distant corridors, shadows, and unseen moments of life. He lay beneath the bent tree, shoulders brushing the younger Morty lightly, breathing in the soft rhythm of presence, reflection, and gentle fulfillment. Somewhere in the distance, unseen, Mortys paused, tension easing, hearts warmed by threads of care they might never name. Morty smiled softly, knowing that quiet heroism, patience, and care were enough to leave a lasting imprint on the world. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. The night had settled across the citadel like a soft blanket, folding corners and corridors into shadows that felt more like gentle whispers than darkness. Morty wandered slowly, humming a faint tune that vibrated with the pulse of the world around him. Every hallway, every tile, every beam of moonlight seemed to hold memory, echoes of presence, and quiet acts of care that had accumulated over time. He paused in a small courtyard, noticing how the shadows pooled softly beneath the bent tree, long and tender, as though the world itself were exhaling. Morty sat quietly beneath the tree, stretching slowly, extending not just his body but his awareness into the corners and corridors that surrounded him. He thought of every Morty he had met, every gentle bond he had nurtured, every soft hum he had shared. The citadel itself seemed alive with the subtle resonance of these moments, a quiet harmony that could not be measured yet could be felt deeply. Morty realized that this rhythm, the slow, patient, gentle flow of care, was his true gift, his quiet heroism, the legacy he would carry beyond recognition. He closed his eyes and remembered the younger Morty who had followed him so patiently, whose trust he had earned without speaking, whose presence had mirrored his own. Morty felt the warmth of their shared moments ripple through him, soft and enduring. Every stretch, every hum, every attentive glance had been part of a network of unseen connection, carrying subtle relief, understanding, and presence to those who needed it, even if they never knew why. The quiet work of noticing, of caring without expectation, had left its mark on the citadel, invisible yet real. The wind rustled softly through distant trees, and the faint glow of windows shimmered like distant stars across courtyards. Morty hummed one last soft tune, letting it drift outward, a gentle thread of presence reaching into corridors, rooms, and hidden spaces where unseen Mortys rested or moved in silence. He imagined every small act of care he had offered. The touches, hums, stretches, attentive pauses expanding into an unseen web of warmth, subtly shaping the rhythm of the citadel itself. As he lay back beneath the bent tree, the younger Morty beside him, shoulders brushing lightly, Morty felt a profound sense of closure settle over him. There was no dramatic moment, no triumphant finale, only the quiet unfolding of time, presence, and understanding. Shadows deepened without harshness, leaves rustled faintly, and the hum of distant hallways mingled with their soft duet. Morty felt the pulse of all those unseen threads of empathy and care vibrating gently through his chest, and he knew that even without notice, they had mattered. He remembered the small doubts he had carried, the uncertainty that had occasionally pressed against his heart. Tonight they felt distant, softened by the quiet persistence of presence and care. Morty understood that resilience and patience were not loud or spectacular, but gentle, enduring, and profound. Quiet acts, unnoticed by most, could ripple across time and space, creating subtle yet lasting change. Even in a place as vast and indifferent as the citadel, Morty's presence had left a soft imprint, a testament to the power of patience, empathy, and gentle attention. The younger Morty rested beside him, eyes tracing the shifting shadows and soft moonlight. They hummed together for a final time, their melodies merging with the rhythm of the night, the rustle of leaves, and the pulse of distant corridors. Morty stretched lightly, not for display, not for recognition, but as a final act of presence, a gentle extension of care into the world. Somewhere in unseen corners, other Mortys paused, tension easing, hearts softening, unknowingly touched by threads of quiet attention. Morty let himself drift into stillness beneath the tree, allowing the hum to fade into silence, the shadows to deepen, and the gentle pulse of the citadel to cradle him. Memory, care, empathy, and presence seemed to settle softly around him, forming a quiet halo of understanding that encompassed past, present, and future. Every small gesture, every attentive pause, every hum shared had merged into a rhythm that was eternal, unseen yet profoundly felt. He whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else, a gentle acknowledgement of the journey and the quiet heroism it had required. Morty felt complete, not because of grandeur or recognition, but because of subtle connections nurtured, lives touched, and the patient unfolding of presence over time. The citadel, vast and winding, seemed to sigh softly in response, folding the night and its countless threads of care into a single, gentle pulse, and somewhere he stretched lightly beneath the moonlight, letting the soft rhythm of his presence drift outward, a quiet thread connecting all who had passed through, all who would come after. Somewhere, a smile unfolded on the lips of an unseen Morty. Somewhere, a shadow softened, and somewhere, the citadel itself breathed with a gentle, knowing calm. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man.